Welcome back. We are continuing our conversation with Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell. Debbie, thank you again for coming in. I want to talk about, we talked about impeachment, but that's not all of what you've been working on in Congress. Let's talk about something that passed through the House on Monday, dealing with e-cigarettes.
Yes.
So this was an important step.
Yes, and what we've seen is really a rise of consumption of nicotine and e-cigarettes by kids in Florida. I think we're seeing about close to 6,000 kids that are using nicotine products, and it's becoming a health epidemic. I talk to parents all over, all different communities, regardless of zip code, regardless of income level. It's an epidemic. Kids are using these e-cigarettes because they're marketing them by using specialty flavors like cotton candy, gum candy, and so this bill, which was passed, and I'm so excited, and it makes my work completely worth it. Leaving my kids to go to D.C. and pass this bill will close the loopholes so that we ban any of those marketing strategies by using those flavors, and also not closing the loopholes for online purchasing of e-cigarettes.
Because it wasn't envisioned. E-cigarettes weren't part of the laws that were written to deal with regular cigarettes.
Exactly. And one of the things that we've seen is that they don't even require ID verification when you purchase the e-cigarettes online. So this bill deals with that specific issue. Another
issue I know that you've worked on a lot was the Homestead Detention Center for Migrant Children, the temporary facility that seemed to take on a sort of a permanent flair to it. It was evacuated during hurricane season. Everyone was anticipating that it might reopen, but you received word this past week that they are not planning on renewing, that the federal government is not renewing the contract with Caliburn, the company that operates it.
So that was a huge victory for me, for my staff who had been working with me on that issue, and for so many community advocates that were right beside me fighting to close the detention facility down. Now, what I received from the Health and Human Services Office is that they will not be renewing the for-profit contract with Caliburn. As you recall, they were paying them $750 a day per child to keep those kids in that detention facility. So they want to, it's not a complete closure yet, so I will continue to ask for and conduct oversight and ask that they don't use that facility to detain kids. They want to keep it in warm status is what they're calling it, saying that if they start receiving more referrals for unaccompanied children, they will bring them back to Homestead, but that is not a facility that you want to detain kids. It feels like a prison. It's a detention. It's like a prison, really.
Well, one of the things, making some calls about this, that I've come to learn is that one of the reasons why they can kill this contract is because the number of kids making it across the border has dropped dramatically. Let me ask you this. Is there an argument to be made that maybe the cruelty of family separation worked? That we're not seeing children cross the border make the dangerous journey?
So that is actually not correct. I think that what is happening is that they are keeping these families that are coming forth to the border to seek asylum or refuge, they're keeping them in Mexico. It's an agreement that they made with the Mexican government, this administration. And so we are now receiving complaints of violence, rape, for women and children that have been kept on that side of the border. So we've basically closed down the border. It's not that they're not coming.
Let me turn to another subject that Congress hopefully will take up, may take up, I don't know. It's the USMCA, the United States, Mexico, Canada trade agreement, the one that would replace NAFTA. The president's been pushing for it. It's an interesting agreement in that it crosses party lines. It's not automatically Democrats in favor of Republicans against it or vice versa. Where do you come down on the new trade agreement?
We've had several meetings in the Florida delegation in D.C., and we are all right now not in favor
Republicans
of it.
and Democrats alike.
Yes, most of it. I think maybe a couple may be in favor of it sooner rather than later. We are right now negotiating. The objective of the House is for us to actually get to a yes vote. We do want to see a better trade agreement, but we are concerned by some unfair trade practices that could really affect the agricultural sector in Florida. So right now the Florida delegation is united that we need to see some revisions to that agreement before it passes.
Because one of the things that's unique about Florida is that our growing season coincides with Mexico's in a very similar way. And what we've seen is that Mexico can dump produce into the United States. And as I understand it, from talking to members of Congress like yourself, Senator Rubio, others, is that you don't necessarily want trade barriers. You just want that if they are violating the agreements by dumping produce, to be able to enforce the mechanisms already in place, and there aren't strong enough mechanisms to keep Mexico from doing that.
That's exactly right. And we have actually asked Ambassador Lighthouser to assure us that they will be enforcing those rules, and which is why we need to renegotiate this agreement. It's a great opportunity for us to get a better trade agreement. Many people, especially here in Florida, were affected by NAFTA. So if we are going to renegotiate NAFTA, let's do it the right way, protecting our agricultural sector here in Florida.
And by the way, when I talk about Mexico dumping crops into the United States, what I'm really talking about are American companies operating in Mexico that then dump produce into the United States. But I want to turn to another area. You recently introduced a bill on Cuban family. You talk to me about
your so it's called the CFRP. It's the Cuban Family Reunification Program. I have been hearing since I got into office in January from hundreds of constituents, Cuban constituents, Cuban-American citizens, by the way, they're citizens, asking for the reopening of this parole program, which was actually, it started under President George W. Bush back in 2007. And what happened after, remember the embassy, when there were attacks on the embassy, they closed the embassy in Cuba and they closed down that program. And they haven't, many of these families have paid thousands of dollars in fees to the immigration, to USCIS, to the USCIS office, and they are getting absolutely no responses. I had a hearing in the immigration subcommittee just a few months ago asking for answers. We're not receiving any answers, no action from the administration. So I introduced a bill this past week, with several of my colleagues joining me, asking for the the immigration offices to start processing those applications, and it takes into account the security of any Americans that have to process these visas. We can do it through teleconferencing. They don't have to go to Cuba. We can do it here in Miami through teleconferencing.
And again, if the goal is to do legal immigration, this is the legal forms.
Exactly.
If you deny people a way to go through the process, then they're going to find other means to come in.
Jim, I just heard from a mother that they paid their fees, they went through the process, the visa was approved, and then they closed the embassy, they closed the processing center, and they have received absolutely no answers.
All right, I need to turn to politics for a second.
Yes.
In the last couple of minutes. You're obviously a freshman. You won in a seat that was previously held by Republicans. There you are going to have a competitor. We just don't know who that will be yet. One of the names that have been floated out there who says he's considering it is Miami-Dade Mayor Carlos Jimenez, running as a Republican against you. What do you think about Carlos Jimenez possibly running?
One of the things that I have to do right now is focus on the work that I need to do every week that I go to D.C. And I know that people think that we are only focusing on impeachment, that that's all we're doing. But I can tell you, just last week, we had a huge hearing questioning the CEO of Boeing on the 737 MAX accidents. We passed the e-cigarette bill. We have been working on water issues. We're trying to reauthorize the water infrastructure bill, which hasn't been reauthorized since 1984. So my goal, I've only been there for 10 months. I have to focus on the work that I need to do for my constituents today, and we'll worry about 2020 when it comes.
What kind of a mayor do you think Carlos Jimenez has been?
From what I've heard from my constituents in South Dade, they've been frustrated. He hasn't been present in South Dade. And, the rail issue is a big one. We wanted rail, and the county mayor and the commission didn't approve rail, and we'll see.
I also thought it was interesting that he toured the Homestead facility, came out of it, gave it a clean bill of health, and then 2 days later, Amnesty International came out with a blistering report talking about all sorts of abuses taking place in there.
Yeah, and he also took away the sanctuary city, which was never, it's just an idea of making sure that we're protecting immigrants. Miami, half of the people that live here in this county have come from a different country. So really siding with the president on the cruel immigration policies are never going to sit well with people living here in South Florida.
It pretends to be an interesting race.
Yeah.
Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, as always, I appreciate your coming in. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, we'll be right back after the break.